Have you ever wondered why something that ended long ago can still feel so alive inside you? Why a conversation from years ago can return in the quiet of the night? Why someone's absence can still occupy so much space in your heart? Or why you can understand intellectually that it is time to move forward, and yet something within you continues to hold on? Perhaps you have told yourself, I should be over this by now. Perhaps you have tried to distract yourself, stay busy, think positively, or convince yourself that it no longer matters. And yet, when the world becomes quiet, there it is again. The memory, the disappointment, the person you wish had understood you, the decision you wish you could change, the future you imagined but never received. Maybe the exhaustion you feel is not coming only from what happened. Maybe some of it is coming from how long you have been carrying what happened. And perhaps your soul is quietly asking you to put it down. Not because your pain was unimportant, not because you should pretend that nothing happened, and certainly not because you must deny the feelings that have been part of your journey. Letting go does not require you to erase your history. It simply invites you to stop allowing your history to become the definition of who you are. There is an important difference between experiencing pain and building an identity around pain. One is part of being human. The other can slowly become a prison. You may have been betrayed, but you are more than the betrayal. You may have lost someone you loved, but you are more than the loss. You may have made mistakes, but you are more than those mistakes. You may have spent years seeking approval from people who could never give you what you needed, but even that does not define the deepest part of you. There is something beneath all of these experiences that has remained untouched. You might call it your true self. You might call it spirit, awareness, presence, or the quiet connection with the source from which life comes. The name matters less than the recognition. There is a part of you that can observe your thoughts without becoming your thoughts. There is a presence within you that can notice fear without being fear. There is something that can witness the story of your life without being limited by the story. And sometimes you encounter that presence unexpectedly. You may feel it while watching the sky change at sunset. You may notice it in the silence before the rest of the house wakes up. Perhaps it appears while you are walking beneath trees, and for a few moments, you forget everything you thought you needed to solve. Nothing outside you has changed, yet suddenly there is peace. Those moments are worth noticing. They suggest that peace may not be something you have to manufacture. Perhaps peace is what becomes visible when the noise within you grows quiet. Think of the sky on a stormy day. Clouds can become so thick that you might almost forget the blue sky exists. But the sky has not disappeared. It has not been damaged by the storm. The clouds move through it while the spaciousness behind them remains. Your thoughts and emotions can be like those clouds. Fear arrives. Anger arrives. Regret arrives. Judgment arrives. They can feel enormous when you are inside them. But perhaps they are experiences passing through your awareness rather than permanent descriptions of who you are. This is where letting go begins. It does not begin by forcing yourself to stop feeling. It begins by becoming aware of what you have been holding. You might notice that you are still waiting for an apology. You may realize that some part of you is still trying to prove your worth to someone who never recognized it. You might discover that you are carrying resentment toward a parent, a former partner, a friend, or even toward yourself. Or perhaps what you are holding is not a person at all. Maybe you are holding an image of how your life was supposed to look by now. You thought you would be further along. You thought you would feel more certain. You thought a relationship would last. You thought your family would understand you. You thought growing older would bring answers instead of new questions. You thought that if you did everything correctly, life would somehow protect you from disappointment. And when reality did not match the picture in your mind, something inside you resisted. That resistance can be subtle. It can sound like, this shouldn't have happened, or they should have treated me differently, or my life should not look like this. These thoughts are understandable. But notice what happens when you repeat them for months or years. The event may have ended while the inner argument continues. You are no longer arguing with another person. You are arguing with reality itself. And reality does not argue back. A river does not stop flowing because we believe it should have turned in another direction. A season does not remain because we are not ready for it to end. The tree releases its leaves without demanding that autumn explain itself. Perhaps nature understands something that the human mind often forgets. Release is part of life. We breathe in and then we breathe out. we receive, and eventually we release. People enter our lives, and sometimes they leave. Roles change, bodies age, children grow, relationships transform, dreams evolve, seasons end. What once felt essential may eventually become something we are being invited to outgrow. Yet the ego often whispers, hold tighter, hold on to the relationship, hold on to the identity, hold on to the grievance, hold on to the expectation, hold on to the need to understand why. The ego often believes that holding on will protect you. It says that if you remember the wound carefully enough, perhaps you will never be wounded again. If you remain angry, perhaps you will remain strong. If you keep replaying the past, perhaps one day you will discover the missing answer that finally gives you peace. But there is a gentle question you can ask yourself. Has holding on to this actually protected my peace? There is no need to judge the answer. Awareness itself is enough for now. You may begin to see that some of the things you are carrying once served a purpose. Anger may have helped you recognize that a boundary had been crossed. Fear may have tried to protect you. Grief may have revealed the depth of your love. Even resentment may have begun as the mind's attempt to make sense of something painful. You do not need to condemn these emotions. You can thank them for what they tried to do. And then you can quietly ask whether they still need to accompany you into the next season of your life. Imagine carrying a heavy suitcase everywhere you go. At first, you remember exactly why every object is inside it. Each one represents something important: a wound, a disappointment, an injustice, a regret, a person who left, a version of yourself you cannot forgive. Eventually, you become so accustomed to the weight that you forget you are carrying anything. You simply assume that life is heavy. Then one day, perhaps in a moment of silence, you put the suitcase down. And for the first time in years, you realize that the heaviness was not you. You were carrying it. That distinction can change everything. You are not your resentment. You are carrying resentment. You are not your fear. You are experiencing fear. You are not your past. You have memories of the past. And if something can be observed within you, perhaps it does not have to define you. This is why your soul's invitation to let go is not an invitation to become someone else. It is almost the opposite. It is an invitation to remember who you were before you decided that your wounds were your identity. There is a quiet self beneath all the defending and proving. A self that does not need everyone to agree. A self that does not need to win every argument with the past. A self that understands that forgiveness does not mean saying what happened was acceptable. It can simply mean, I no longer choose to carry this inside me every day. And perhaps that is where freedom begins. Not when everyone finally understands you. Not when every unanswered question receives an answer. Not when the past somehow rearranges itself into the version you wanted. Freedom may begin in the moment you stop asking yesterday for permission to be peaceful today. There may still be sadness. There may still be memories. There may still be moments when the old story returns. Letting go is rarely a single dramatic event. Often it is a quiet choice made again and again. You notice the thought. You notice the tension. You notice yourself reaching once more for the familiar story. And instead of fighting it, you simply become aware. You might say inwardly, I see what I am holding. That awareness creates space. And in that space, something else becomes possible. Love can enter where judgment once lived. Compassion can enter where shame once lived. Understanding can enter where resentment once lived. And silence can begin to soften the endless conversation in your mind. You do not have to accomplish all of this tonight. You only need to become curious about what your soul may already be trying to show you. What if the discomfort you feel is not evidence that something is wrong with you? What if it is the friction between the person you truly are and the story you have been carrying? What if your exhaustion is partly the exhaustion of trying to control what has already happened, trying to receive love from people who cannot give it, trying to force certainty from a life that was never designed to reveal every step in advance? And what if the peace you have been searching for is not waiting somewhere in the future? Perhaps it is beneath the very thing you are afraid to release. There is a deeper question waiting here. If you are not the pain you have carried, if you are not the judgments you have accumulated, if you are not the fears you have repeated or the roles you have learned to perform, then who are you when all of that becomes quiet? That is where our journey begins. Because before you can truly let go, you may need to understand the part of you that is so afraid of releasing its grip. You may need to look gently at the ego not as an enemy, but as the frightened voice within you that believes control creates safety and attachment creates identity. And once you can see that voice without becoming it, you may discover something beautiful. The part of you that has been searching for freedom is already free. Once you begin to notice what you have been carrying, another question naturally arises. Why is it so difficult to let go of something that you already know is hurting you? You may understand that resentment is exhausting you. You may know that a relationship has ended. You may recognize that worrying cannot control tomorrow. You may even see clearly that a certain version of your life is no longer possible. And still, something within you reaches backward. This is where it can be helpful to look gently at the ego, not as an enemy, not as something you need to destroy. The moment you begin fighting the ego, you may simply create another form of conflict inside yourself. Instead, imagine the ego as a frightened part of the mind that learned to survive by creating stories about who you are, what you need, and what must happen for you to be safe. The ego likes certainty. It likes labels. It likes knowing where it stands. It says, this is who I am. This is what happened to me. These are the people who hurt me. This is what my future should look like. This is what others must think of me. And when life refuses to cooperate with these stories, fear appears. Perhaps this is why uncertainty can feel so uncomfortable. You are standing at the edge of something new, and the mind cannot see what comes next. So it reaches backward toward what is familiar, even when the familiar was painful. Sometimes people remain emotionally attached to situations they would never consciously choose again, simply because the pain has become known territory. The unknown may contain peace, but the ego would sometimes rather choose familiar suffering than unfamiliar freedom. You can see this in relationships. Imagine someone who has spent years trying to earn the affection of a person who rarely gives it freely. Perhaps it is a partner, perhaps a parent, perhaps a friend. Every small gesture of approval feels precious because approval has been so difficult to receive. Over time, a strange belief begins to form. If I can finally make this person love me the way I need to be loved, then I will know that I am worthy. Now the relationship is no longer only about love. It has become a test of identity. Walking away becomes frightening because it seems to mean abandoning the possibility of finally proving your worth. But what if your worth was never being decided there? What if another person's inability to recognize your light has nothing to do with the existence of that light? The sun does not become less radiant because someone closes the curtains. Perhaps you have spent years standing outside someone's emotional window, waiting for them to open it. And perhaps your soul is not asking you to knock louder. Perhaps it is inviting you to remember that the light you are asking them to give you was already within you. This does not mean relationships are unimportant. Human connection can be one of life's greatest teachers. We learn tenderness, patience, vulnerability, and compassion through one another. But love becomes painful when we ask another human being to become the source of what can only be discovered within. When you say, consciously or unconsciously, you must behave this way so that I can be peaceful, you have handed someone else the key to your inner world. And then your peace becomes fragile. A message that does not arrive can disturb you. A facial expression can disturb you. A criticism can disturb you. Someone's silence can become an entire story in your mind. You begin interpreting everything because the ego is constantly asking one question: what does this say about me? Someone does not invite you, and the mind says, I am unwanted. Someone disagrees with you, and the mind says, I am not respected. Someone succeeds in an area where you are struggling, and the mind says, I am falling behind. Someone leaves, and the mind says, I was not enough. Notice how quickly an external event can become an internal identity. This is one of the ego's most convincing habits. It takes what happens around you and turns it into a statement about who you are. Awareness interrupts this process. Instead of immediately believing, I am not enough, you begin noticing, there is a thought in me saying, I am not enough. That small difference is enormous. One statement is an identity. The other is awareness. And awareness gives you space. Think of standing beside a river. Thoughts are like leaves floating downstream. Some are beautiful, some are dark. Some are familiar enough that you recognize them immediately. You do not need to jump into the river every time a leaf passes. You can simply watch. A thought may say, you are behind. You can notice it. A thought may say, they should never have done that to you. You can notice it. A thought may say, something terrible is going to happen. You can notice that too. Awareness does not demand that you replace every uncomfortable thought with a pleasant one. It simply reminds you that you are the one noticing the thought. And perhaps the observer is closer to your true nature than the thought itself. This becomes especially important with fear. Fear has a remarkable ability to pull your attention away from the present moment. It takes you into an imagined future and asks you to suffer there before anything has actually happened. You lie awake at night thinking about what might happen next month. What if you lose something? What if someone leaves? What if your health changes? What if you make the wrong choice? What if the future does not unfold according to your plans? The body is lying safely in bed, but the mind may be living through 10 different disasters. The ego tells you this is preparation. It says, if I worry enough, perhaps I can prevent surprise. But worry rarely gives you control. More often, it gives the imagined future control over the present. You may spend today's peace paying interest on tomorrow's uncertainty. What would happen if, for one moment, you allowed yourself not to know? Not knowing does not mean that you do not care. It does not mean you stop making wise choices. It simply means you stop demanding that life reveal the entire road before you are willing to take the next step. Consider how you drive at night. Your headlights do not illuminate the entire journey. They reveal only a small section of road in front of you. And somehow, that is enough. You do not pull over and refuse to continue because you cannot see every mile between where you are and where you are going. You trust the next visible stretch. Perhaps life asks for a similar trust. The ego wants a map of the next 10 years. Your deeper self may only be asking you to become fully present to this moment. What is actually happening now? Not tomorrow, not in the story, not in the memory. Now, perhaps you are sitting in a quiet room. Perhaps sunlight is entering through a window. Perhaps someone you love is nearby. Perhaps your breath is moving naturally in and out of your body. For this moment, perhaps nothing needs to be solved. This is not denial. Problems still exist. Responsibilities remain. Decisions must sometimes be made. But you approach them differently when you are rooted in presence instead of fear. One of the most exhausting habits of the ego is the belief that control creates peace. If I can control the outcome, then I can relax. If I can control what they think of me, then I can relax. If I can control my children, my partner, my future, my body, my circumstances, then I can finally relax. But life keeps reminding us that control is limited. People make their own choices. Bodies change. Plans fail. Unexpected doors open. Unexpected doors close. Seasons arrive without asking whether we are ready. You can spend enormous energy trying to command the river, or you can learn how to move with it. This does not mean becoming passive. A person floating peacefully down a river is not unconscious. They are attentive. They notice the rocks. They make adjustments. They respond to what is actually present. But they do not spend the journey shouting at the river for flowing. There is a difference between conscious action and resistance. Conscious action asks, what can I lovingly do in this moment? Resistance asks, how can I force life to become what I believe it should be? The first creates clarity. The second often creates exhaustion. You may recognize resistance in people-pleasing. Perhaps you learned very early that harmony meant keeping everyone around you happy. You became skilled at sensing what others needed. You learned how to avoid disappointing people. You said yes when your heart quietly wanted to say no. And perhaps everyone described you as kind. But there is a difference between kindness that comes from love and pleasing that comes from fear. Love says, I care about you. Fear says, I need you to approve of me. From the outside, the actions may look identical. Inside, they feel completely different. When you live for approval, you slowly become disconnected from your own inner voice. You ask, what will they think, before asking what feels true. You worry about disappointing others while repeatedly abandoning yourself. Eventually, resentment may appear, not necessarily because other people demanded too much, but because you repeatedly offered what you did not genuinely want to give and hoped that their approval would compensate for the inner cost. Awareness allows you to see this without blaming yourself. Perhaps people-pleasing once kept you emotionally safe. Perhaps it helped you belong. Perhaps it was something you learned when you were too young to know another way. You can honor that. And then you can ask, do I still need this? The same question can be asked about comparison. Comparison is another way the ego tries to determine identity. You look at someone else's life and immediately measure your own. They seem happier. They seem more loved. They seem more certain. Their family appears closer. Their path looks clearer. They seem to know what they are doing while you still feel confused. And for a moment, you forget something important. You are comparing the inside of your life with the outside of theirs. You know every doubt you carry, but you see only what they reveal. More deeply, comparison assumes that life is a single race in which everyone should arrive at the same places at approximately the same time. Nature does not seem to live this way. A rose does not look at an oak tree and wonder why it is not taller. The moon does not compete with the sun. A seed does not feel ashamed because the seed beside it opened first. Each expression of life unfolds according to its own nature and season. What if you could extend that same permission to yourself? Perhaps you are not late. Perhaps you are simply living your particular season. Some seasons are for blooming, others are for releasing. Some seasons bring companionship, others bring solitude. Some seasons give answers, others teach you how to live peacefully with questions. When you stop comparing your season to someone else's, you can begin listening to what your own life is asking from you. And sometimes life asks you to release an identity. This can be surprisingly painful. You may have spent years being the strong one, the successful one, the responsible one, the person everyone depends upon. Then something changes. Perhaps you retire. Perhaps your children no longer need you in the same way. Perhaps a relationship ends. Perhaps aging changes what your body can do. Perhaps a role that once gave you purpose simply disappears. The ego asks, who am I if I am no longer this? This question can feel frightening because we often confuse our roles with our being. But every role you have ever played has changed. You were once a child, perhaps a student, perhaps a partner, perhaps a parent, perhaps a worker, a caregiver, a leader, a friend. The forms keep changing. Yet something has been present through all of them. There was an awareness watching the child. The same awareness watched the young adult. It watches you now. Your face changed, your beliefs changed, your relationships changed, your body changed, your circumstances changed. Yet there remains an unmistakable sense of I am. Before you add anything after those words, there is simply being. I am. Perhaps your deepest identity lives there. Not I am what happened to me, not I am what people think of me, not I am my achievements, not I am my mistakes. Simply I am. There is great peace in allowing yourself to rest there. And from that place, forgiveness begins to look different. You may have believed forgiveness meant allowing someone to escape responsibility. The ego may say, if I forgive, then what they did not matter. But perhaps forgiveness has less to do with releasing another person from responsibility and more to do with releasing yourself from carrying their actions inside your consciousness. Imagine someone handed you a burning piece of coal. At first, you hold it because you intend to throw it back. But while you wait for the right moment, whose hand is burning? Resentment can feel like that. You may have every reason to be angry. The wound may have been real. The injustice may have been real. Yet eventually another question becomes more important than whether your anger is justified. Do I want to continue carrying this? That question does not erase the past. It returns the future to you. And sometimes the person you most need to release from judgment is yourself. There may be things you wish you had known earlier. Perhaps you stayed too long, trusted someone you wish you had not trusted, missed an opportunity, hurt someone, ignored your intuition, made a choice that changed your life. Looking backward, the mind says, you should have known. But the person you were then did not possess everything you know now. That wisdom came partly because you lived through the experience. Would you judge a seed because it was not already a tree? Could you look at your younger self with the same compassion? That person was trying to find love, trying to avoid pain, trying to belong, trying to understand life with the awareness available at the time. Perhaps self-forgiveness begins when you stop demanding that your past self should have possessed your present understanding. You can learn without condemning. You can take responsibility without creating shame. You can say, I would choose differently now, without saying, therefore I am unworthy of peace. And when you begin doing this, something softens. You discover that letting go is not an act of force. You cannot violently force yourself into peace. You cannot shame yourself into forgiveness. You cannot hate the ego until it disappears. You simply become more aware. And awareness is like bringing a lamp into a dark room. You do not fight the darkness. You turn on the light, Perhaps this is why so much spiritual transformation happens quietly. You notice when fear is speaking. You notice when you are trying to control. You notice when comparison pulls you away from your own path. You notice when you are seeking approval. You notice when an old wound begins telling you who you are. And instead of immediately following those voices, you become still enough to ask, is there another way to see this? That question opens a door. Behind the fear, perhaps there is trust. Behind the resentment, perhaps there is grief waiting to be acknowledged. Behind the need for approval, perhaps there is a longing to remember your own worth. Behind control, perhaps there is simply a frightened part of you asking to know that you will be okay. You do not need to silence that frightened part. You can meet it with love. You can say inwardly, I understand why you are afraid, but we do not have to live from fear anymore. And then, little by little, you begin loosening your grip, not because you suddenly know how everything will turn out, but because you begin trusting something deeper than certainty. You begin trusting the intelligence that opens flowers without instruction and moves oceans without effort. The same intelligence that beats your heart while you sleep and turns a seed toward the light. You may call it life. You may call it God. You may call it the source. Whatever language feels natural to you, perhaps there is comfort in remembering that you are not separate from the life that created you. You do not have to carry the entire universe on your shoulders. You never did. And perhaps this is the great misunderstanding of the ego. It believes surrender means losing control. But what if surrender is simply recognizing that you never had to control everything in order to be at peace? There comes a moment when the hand that has been clenched for years begins to open. At first, it may feel vulnerable. Then it begins to feel like relief. You realize that you can love someone without controlling them. You can remember the past without living inside it. You can care about tomorrow without abandoning today. You can have preferences without demanding that life obey them. You can feel sadness without becoming sadness. And you can walk into uncertainty without leaving yourself behind. This is the beginning of a different relationship with life. You are no longer asking every circumstance to prove that you are safe, worthy, or loved. You begin discovering those qualities within. And as the ego's grip becomes softer, you may notice something that was there beneath the noise all along. A quiet presence, a deeper intelligence, a tenderness that does not depend on anyone's approval, a sense that perhaps you have never been as separate from love as you imagined. This is where letting go begins to become more than release. It becomes a return to the part of you that existed before the fear, before the comparison, before the need to prove, before you built walls around your heart and called them protection. And as you return there, a new question begins to emerge. If fear is no longer choosing for you, how would you live? If resentment is no longer carrying yesterday into today, how would you love? If you no longer need to control every outcome, what might you finally be able to trust? These questions lead us towards something even deeper than letting go. They lead us home. And perhaps home is not a place you have to find. Perhaps it is the place within you that you stopped visiting when you became too busy defending yourself from life. There is a quiet shift that happens when you begin to see the ego without allowing it to lead every decision. You do not suddenly become fearless. You do not wake up one morning with every wound healed and every question answered. Life remains life. People may still misunderstand you. Plans may still change. Loss may still visit. Uncertainty may still appear at your door. But something inside you begins to respond differently. Instead of asking, how can I make life stop disturbing my peace? You begin asking, can I discover a peace that does not depend entirely upon life behaving the way I want? That is a very different question, and it leads you back toward your true self. The true self does not mean a perfect version of you. It is not the person who never becomes angry, afraid, disappointed, or confused. Trying to become that person would simply create another ideal for the ego to chase. Your true self may be much simpler. It is the awareness that can hold all of these experiences without being reduced to any one of them. It is the quiet presence beneath the changing weather of your mind. It is the part of you that still knows how to love even after disappointment, that can still recognize beauty after loss, that can still become silent enough to feel connected with something greater than the story of your individual life. Returning to that self begins with acceptance. Acceptance is often misunderstood because we imagine it means approving of everything that has happened. But you can accept that something happened without believing it should have happened. You can accept that a relationship has ended without saying the ending was what you wanted. You can accept that someone hurt you without saying their behavior was right. You can accept that your body is aging without pretending that every change is easy. Acceptance simply means that you stop demanding that the present moment become something other than what it already is before you are willing to meet it. Imagine standing in the rain and spending all your energy shouting at the clouds. You may have good reasons for wanting sunshine. You may have planned your day around sunshine. Perhaps yesterday's forecast promised sunshine. But the rain is already falling. At some point, wisdom may be found not in winning the argument with the weather, but in opening the umbrella and taking the next step. Much of emotional suffering works in a similar way. Something happened, and then the mind begins its protest. This cannot be happening. This should not be happening. My life was not supposed to go this way. And beneath those thoughts is often grief. Grief deserves tenderness. Sometimes what you need to release is not anger first. It is the future you imagined. You may grieve the marriage you believed would last. You may grieve the parent you needed but never truly had. You may grieve a friendship that changed. You may grieve the younger body you once lived in. You may grieve years spent trying to become someone you thought other people would approve of. There is nothing spiritually inferior about grief. To love deeply is to become vulnerable to loss. The invitation is not to avoid grief, but to allow grief to move. A river becomes stagnant when its movement is blocked. Emotion can become similar when you decide you should not feel it. Perhaps you were taught to be strong. Perhaps being strong meant not crying, not admitting that you were hurt, not allowing anyone to see how much something mattered. But strength may sometimes look like sitting quietly with your own heart and saying, yes, this hurt, without adding a story, without deciding what it means about your worth, without turning the pain into an identity, just acknowledging what is here. There is something healing in being honest without becoming attached. You can say, I am grieving, rather than I am broken. You can say, I feel afraid, rather than I am a fearful person. You can say, I made a mistake, rather than I am a mistake. Language reveals where identity has become attached to experience, and awareness gently separates the two. This is where forgiveness can become possible. Perhaps there is someone whose name still creates tension in your body. Years may have passed, yet the memory of what happened remains vivid. You may have imagined forgiving this person many times, but each time another voice says, they do not deserve forgiveness. Perhaps they do not. But forgiveness is not always something you give because another person deserves it. Sometimes forgiveness is something you allow because you deserve freedom. Imagine keeping someone imprisoned in a room inside your mind. Every day you visit the room to make sure they are still there. You replay the argument. You remember the betrayal. You remind yourself of the injustice. They may no longer be present in your physical life. Yet you continue meeting them internally. Who, then, is truly imprisoned? Forgiveness can be the moment you stop visiting the room. You do not have to open the door and invite the person back into your life. Forgiveness and reconciliation are not always the same thing. You can forgive and still have boundaries. You can release resentment and still choose distance. You can wish someone peace without giving them access to your inner world. Love does not require you to abandon discernment. Sometimes love says yes. Sometimes love quietly says no. The important question is the place from which the answer comes. Is your no coming from hatred or from clarity? Is your yes coming from love or from fear of rejection? Two people can make the same decision outwardly while living in completely different inner worlds. This is why intention matters. Intention is not merely deciding what you want from life. It can be understood more deeply as deciding what quality of being you want to bring into life. You may not control whether another person understands you, but you can intend to speak with honesty. You may not control whether someone stays, but you can intend to love without abandoning yourself. You may not control the future, but you can intend to meet it with presence rather than constant fear. You may not control what happened yesterday, but you can choose whether yesterday will determine the energy you bring into today. When intention arises from love rather than fear, you stop trying to manipulate life into giving you peace. You bring peace to life. Imagine entering a room carrying a candle. You do not argue with the darkness. You do not demand that the darkness leave before you enter. You simply bring light. Perhaps this is what alignment with the source can feel like. You become less concerned with controlling every condition and more interested in the energy you contribute to the condition. Someone speaks harshly to you. The old pattern might immediately defend, attack, or withdraw. Awareness creates a small pause. Inside that pause, you remember that another person's anger does not require you to become angry. You can listen. You can respond. You can set a boundary. You can leave. But you do not have to become what has been offered to you. If someone hands you fear, you do not have to carry it. If someone hands you judgment, you do not have to make it yours. If someone refuses to see your worth, you do not have to join them. This is not emotional detachment in the cold sense. It is spiritual responsibility. You begin taking responsibility for the state of your own inner world, and there is great freedom in that. For years, perhaps you believed peace would arrive when circumstances finally aligned, when the right person loved you, when your family understood you, when your future became certain, when your past stopped hurting, when you finally became the person you believed you should be. But what if peace is not the reward waiting at the end of a perfectly arranged life? What if peace is the way you walk through an imperfect one? A tree does not wait for the wind to stop before it becomes a tree. Its branches move. Its leaves fall. Storms come. Seasons change. Yet its roots remain quietly connected to the earth. Perhaps your spiritual life is less about preventing the wind and more about remembering your roots. Those roots may be found in silence. There is a reason silence can feel uncomfortable at first. When external noise disappears, you begin hearing the inner noise more clearly. You notice the conversations you have been replaying. You notice the judgments. You notice the worries. You notice how often the mind leaves the present moment. Many people interpret this as failure. They sit quietly and discover that their thoughts are everywhere, so they decide they are not good at stillness. But noticing the noise is already awareness. You do not need to stop every thought. Let them arrive. Let them leave. Imagine sitting on the shore watching waves. No one stands at the ocean demanding that the waves become still. You understand that movement belongs to the ocean's surface. Yet deep beneath those waves there is an enormous quiet. Your mind may have waves. Your being has depth. When you become still, even for a few moments, you begin remembering that depth. And from there, surrender becomes more natural. Surrender is one of those words that can sound like defeat. We associate surrender with losing. But spiritual surrender may be closer to ending a war that never needed to continue. The war with your past, the war with yourself, the war with aging, the war with uncertainty, the war with people who refuse to become who you need them to be. How much energy has been spent fighting things you cannot change? There comes a moment when you realize that putting down the sword does not make you weak. It makes your hands available for something else. Perhaps for love, perhaps for gratitude, perhaps simply for receiving this moment. Think of something you have been trying desperately to control. Maybe you are worried about someone you love. You have given advice. You have tried to protect them. You have imagined every possible outcome. And perhaps underneath your concern is a belief that loving someone means ensuring that nothing painful ever happens to them. But everyone has their own journey. You can walk beside someone. You can offer love. You can offer wisdom when it is welcomed. But you cannot live another person's life. There is humility in recognizing this. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop trying to control someone else's path and trust that the same source that guides you can also reach them. You release them from your fear, and you release yourself from the impossible responsibility of managing their destiny. This does not mean you stop caring. It means your caring becomes less entangled with control. Love says, I am here. Fear says, I need to know how this ends. Love can remain present without knowing. This is why trust becomes essential to letting go. Trust does not mean believing that everything will happen according to your preferences. Life has never made that promise. Trust can mean something quieter. It can mean believing that whatever comes, you can meet it without abandoning the deepest part of yourself. It can mean trusting that endings can contain beginnings you cannot yet see. Trusting that silence may have something to teach you. Trusting that the path does not have to be visible for the next step to be meaningful. Look at a seed beneath the earth. From the surface, nothing appears to be happening. There is darkness. There is pressure. There is no visible evidence of a flower. Yet something is unfolding. Perhaps there are seasons in your life that feel exactly this way. You cannot see what is being formed. The old life no longer fits, but the new one has not yet appeared. This in-between space can be frightening because the ego has nothing to name. But perhaps you do not need to name it. Perhaps you can simply be present within it. A seed does not dig itself out of the soil every morning to check whether it is growing correctly. There is an intelligence within it that knows how to reach toward light. Could there be an intelligence within you that you have overlooked because you were so busy trying to control every detail? You have experienced this intelligence before. It may have appeared as intuition, a quiet knowing that a relationship was no longer right, a gentle pull toward a new direction, a feeling that you needed to rest, an unexpected impulse to forgive, a moment when you knew that continuing an old pattern would cost you too much peace. The voice of the ego is often loud. It argues, it compares, it demands evidence. The voice of inner knowing may be quieter. It does not usually shout. That is why you may need silence to hear it. And when you hear it, it often brings you toward simplicity. Release this. Forgive this. Stop proving. Rest. Be present. Choose love. Trust. These invitations may not satisfy the ego because they do not provide guarantees, but something deeper in you recognizes them. Perhaps that recognition is what you have been calling your soul, not a distant mystical voice, but the quiet wisdom within you that remembers what the frightened mind forgets. It remembers that you belong to life. It remembers that your worth was never being voted upon. It remembers that love is your nature before it becomes something you seek from others. It remembers that peace does not require a perfect past. And it remembers that you were never meant to carry every experience forever. There are trees that could never receive spring if they refused to release autumn. There are rivers that could never reach the ocean if they insisted on remaining where they began. There are doors you cannot walk through while both hands are filled with yesterday. Letting go creates space. And perhaps that space is what frightened you. Because once resentment leaves, who will you be without the story? Once you stop trying to prove yourself, what will guide you? Once you release the relationship, the role, the expectation, the old identity, what remains? At first, perhaps only silence. Stay there. Do not rush to fill it. The ego may call emptiness dangerous because it cannot define you there. But spiritually, emptiness can become spaciousness. And within that spaciousness, you may begin noticing gratitude. Not the forced gratitude that tells you to pretend painful experiences were wonderful. A deeper gratitude. Gratitude that you survived what you once thought would destroy you. Gratitude for what the experience revealed. Gratitude for the people who stayed. Gratitude for the strength you discovered without needing to make strength your identity. Gratitude for this breath, this morning, this chance to see differently. Sometimes gratitude appears naturally when we stop demanding that life should have been another way. You begin seeing what is here rather than constantly comparing it with what is missing. The ordinary becomes sacred again. A cup of tea in a quiet room. The voice of someone you love. Rain against the window. Your feet touching the ground. Your own breath reminding you that life is happening now. Perhaps this is what returning to the source means in everyday life. Not escaping the world. Entering it more completely. Seeing the sacred within the ordinary. Recognizing that the same intelligence moving through oceans, trees, stars, and seasons is moving through your life as well. You begin feeling less like a separate person struggling against existence and more like an expression of existence itself. And from that place, love changes. Love is no longer only something you receive from another person. It becomes something you participate in. You become kinder without needing recognition. You forgive because freedom feels more natural than resentment. You listen more deeply. You stop trying to win conversations that cost you your peace. You begin blessing people you once needed to change. And sometimes loving someone means releasing them. You quietly say, I no longer need you to become different for me to be whole. There is extraordinary freedom in that sentence. You may even offer it to your past. I no longer need you to have been different for me to be whole. And perhaps, finally, to yourself. I no longer need the person I used to be to have been perfect for me to love who I am now. Then something inside you exhales. The story remains, but it no longer owns you. The scar remains, but you stop reopening the wound to prove that it happened. The memory remains, but when it arrives, you can meet it with compassion rather than resistance. This is how the past becomes wisdom. You do not erase it. You transform your relationship with it. And perhaps one day you notice something surprising. You remember the person. You remember the event. You remember the version of yourself who suffered. But the old emotional charge is no longer there. There is simply space. Maybe even tenderness, And you realize that letting go happened quietly while you were learning to return to yourself. You did not become someone new. You stopped carrying what was never your deepest identity. You remembered. And now the question becomes how to live from this remembrance when ordinary life returns, when old triggers appear, when fear whispers again, and when the mind reaches for familiar stories. Because spiritual understanding becomes most meaningful when it enters the small moments of an ordinary day. And that is where your freedom begins, to become a way of living. And so the question is no longer simply, can I let go? The deeper question becomes, can I live with an open hand? Because life will continue to bring experiences that invite you to hold tightly. Someone may disappoint you. A plan may change unexpectedly. An old memory may return. You may wake one morning and discover that the fear you thought you had released is standing quietly at the door again. This does not mean you have failed. Perhaps spiritual growth is not measured by whether fear ever returns. Perhaps it is revealed in the way you meet fear when it does. The old way may have been to immediately believe every thought. The new way is to notice. You can wake with anxiety and simply recognize, fear is here this morning. You do not need to build a future around it. You do not need to become afraid of being afraid. You can breathe. You can become still. You can allow the feeling to move through you without giving it authority over your identity. This is where a few quiet moments each day can become meaningful. Before reaching for the outside world in the morning, you might sit in silence and notice your breath. There is nothing complicated about this. You are not trying to become enlightened before breakfast. You are simply remembering that before the responsibilities, messages, opinions, and expectations arrive, there is a quiet presence within you. Return there, even for a few minutes. Notice what your mind is carrying. Perhaps ask yourself, what am I holding today that I do not need to carry? Do not force an answer. Sometimes awareness is enough. Maybe you notice resentment from yesterday. Maybe you are already worrying about tomorrow. Maybe you are rehearsing a conversation that has not happened. Maybe you are trying to control someone's opinion of you. See it gently. Then imagine opening your hand. You do not have to solve everything you notice. Sometimes the deepest practice is simply refusing to tighten your grip. During the day, you may find small opportunities to return to this awareness. When someone says something that irritates you, notice the moment before reaction. When comparison appears, notice it before believing that another person's path says anything about yours. When you make a mistake, listen for the voice that wants to turn one imperfect moment into a judgment about your entire being. And in that small space between what happens and what you choose to carry, remember yourself. You are not required to accept every invitation to conflict. You are not required to turn every criticism into a wound. You are not required to make every uncertainty into a catastrophe. You are allowed to protect your peace, not by building walls around your heart, but by becoming conscious of what you allow to live there. At the end of the day, forgiveness can become a quiet form of release. You might think of someone who disturbed your peace and simply say inwardly, I release you from the role I have given you in my mind. You do not need to contact them. You do not need to pretend you agree with what happened. You are simply deciding that you will not carry them into your sleep. And remember to offer the same kindness to yourself. There may have been moments today when you were impatient, moments when fear spoke through you, moments when you returned to an old pattern. You are learning. A garden does not become beautiful because someone stands over it criticizing every seed that has not yet opened. It grows through light, patience, nourishment, and time. Perhaps your inner life deserves the same tenderness. Instead of ending the day by reviewing everything you did wrong, you might remember something simple for which you are grateful. A conversation, a meal, a moment of laughter, the evening sky, the fact that you noticed one old pattern before allowing it to carry you away. Gratitude does not deny what is difficult. It simply reminds you that difficulty is not the whole story. There is still beauty here. There is still love here. There is still life moving through you. And slowly, trust becomes less of an idea and more of a way of being. You begin trusting that not every unanswered question needs an immediate answer. You trust that some endings need time before their meaning becomes clear. You trust yourself to recognize what belongs in your life and what no longer does. Most importantly, perhaps you begin trusting that the source is not somewhere outside you, waiting for you to become worthy enough to approach it. The life within you is already connected to the life around you. The wave has never been separate from the ocean. It may rise for a moment and appear to have its own shape. It may travel, change, and eventually dissolve. Yet at every moment, it is ocean. Perhaps you are like that. You have a name, a history, a personality, a collection of memories. You have known joy and loss. You have played many roles. But beneath those changing forms is something larger, something quiet, something that does not need to prove itself. When you remember that, letting go becomes less frightening. You are not losing yourself. You are releasing what prevented you from experiencing yourself clearly. The resentment was not you. The fear was not you. The judgment was not you. The need to control everything was not you. They were clouds moving across a much larger sky, and the sky remained. Perhaps this is the peace you have been searching for. Not a life without storms, a recognition of the spaciousness within you that storms cannot permanently destroy. And maybe, looking back, you can begin seeing your journey differently. The relationship that ended may have shown you where you abandoned yourself. The rejection may have revealed how much of your worth you had placed in someone else's hands. The uncertainty may have taught you that you could walk without seeing the entire road. The mistake may have opened the door to compassion. The loss may have taught you how deeply you were capable of loving. You do not have to call every painful experience a gift. Some things simply hurt. But even pain does not have to become a permanent home. You can honor what happened and still move forward. You can remember and still release. You can love and still say goodbye. You can forgive and still choose a different path. You can be grateful for who you have become without wishing the suffering had occurred. This is the gentle freedom of letting go. And perhaps today there is something within you that is ready. Not everything. Just one thing. One old argument you no longer need to win. One judgment about yourself you are tired of repeating. One person you are ready to stop carrying. One future you are exhausted from trying to control. One version of yourself you are willing to forgive. You do not need a dramatic ceremony. You might simply become quiet and say, "Thank you for what you taught me. I no longer need to carry you." Then breathe and notice the space that remains. Do not rush to fill it. Let peace enter slowly. Let gratitude enter. Let silence enter. Let love return to the places that fear occupied for so long. Because perhaps this entire journey was never about becoming a stronger, wiser, more spiritual version of yourself. Perhaps it was about removing what covered the wisdom that was already there. You were never being asked to become someone new. You were being invited to remember that your peace begins within, to remember that another person's behavior does not determine your worth, to remember that forgiveness is freedom, to remember that surrender is not defeat, to remember that you can trust life without knowing exactly where it is taking you, and to remember that beneath every story you have told about yourself, there is still a quiet presence connected to love. Your soul has not been asking you to let go because what happened did not matter. It has been asking because you matter too much to spend the rest of your life carrying what has already completed its purpose. So walk gently from here. There is nowhere you need to rush. There is nothing you need to prove. When fear returns, meet it with awareness. When resentment returns, meet it with forgiveness. When uncertainty returns, meet it with trust. When you forget who you are, become still enough to remember. And when life asks you to release another season, remember the tree. It does not mourn every leaf as evidence that something has gone wrong. It releases what has completed its time and stands quietly beneath an open sky. Then, when the season is right, new life appears. Perhaps you can trust your seasons, too. If something in this journey spoke to a place within you that has been waiting to release, you may share your reflection in the comments. Sometimes simply naming what you are ready to let go of can become the beginning of a new relationship with yourself. And if these quiet spiritual journeys help you return to your own inner peace, you are welcome to subscribe and continue walking with us. For now, there is nothing more you need to do. Take one gentle breath. Feel this moment. You are here. You are alive. And underneath everything you have carried, the peace you were searching for has been quietly waiting. Not somewhere ahead of you, within you. Perhaps it has always been there. You simply forgot. And now you are remembering.